Hey y'all, IrixGuy here, and welcome to a special event, a live show. And today's live show is going to be all about the Sony a7 III that I have in my hands here, also commonly referred to as the Sony a7 Mark III, because it's got those three little, you can see right there, it's got those three little marks. So a7 III. What I want to do is just answer your questions. Obviously, you know, your feedback. Have you had experience with the a7 III yet? Quite a hard camera to come by at this point in time. Just being released, it's quite difficult to find, but you can find it on my website, and also the batteries, the lenses, and everything. But what I want to talk about primarily is, you know, what are my thoughts in regards to the a7 III after only having my hands on it for a few hours, and how does it compare to the Sony a7R II. Now, I've used the Sony a7R II for several years. Great camera, but obviously had its shortcomings, and those shortcomings were overheating issues. Fortunately, a lot of that was resolved with a firmware update, but still on occasion when it was really hot out, the a7R II would overheat. The battery in the a7R II, although it wasn't a deal breaker, it was a situation where if someone's going to be in the field all day, they're probably going to have to carry a significant amount of batteries. One of the things I've already noticed with the a7 III is that the battery life is absolutely amazing. I've recorded some test stuff in the studio, haven't taken it out in the field yet. But I plan to within the next few days, and obviously I'll be posting an extensive amount of 4K video, and also get a lot of stills, because a lot of people are curious, you know, if you're a stills photographer, how does this camera compare to the a7R II or the a7R III? Obviously both of those are higher megapixel. They're around 42 megapixels, and this right here is, I think, around 24 megapixels. But I'm not going to say megapixels is purely a marketing thing. Jose Rodriguez, welcome aboard. Do you know about the EOS M? Talking about a Canon camera. Haven't really followed. Canon is really good stuff, but I don't really follow Canon. I pretty much followed Sony and Panasonic. So I really, if there's some news out there about a new Canon EOS, it's something that I'm kind of in the dark about. There is another camera, and it was announced at UAB, and it caught a lot of attention. It's a micro four thirds camera, and it's being released by Blackmagic Design, and it's got 4K 60 capability, and it looks pretty impressive. But you know, back to the a7 III that I have right here, just wanted to point out some immediate observations. One of those coming from the a7R II or the a7R III, you'll notice that this knob right here doesn't have the little button in the middle. So that was something you would have to push before you could turn this. Have I ever had this turn while in use? I mean, would I have it turn while in use? Because I've only had this camera for about 24 hours, but it would be very hard. I mean, I could see if you had it in a backpack and it wasn't in a case or whatever, something could potentially turn this, and that's where the button in the middle of the a7R III or a7R II may provide value. But it's, I don't know, that's a subtle difference between the a7R II and the a7R III. Another thing that you might notice is and this is something that I didn't really notice, the EVF and the LCD display on the back, they're not as high of resolution as the a7R III. So, you know, I was expecting, before I got this camera, I was expecting something that would be not useful. But, you know, if I didn't already have that implanted in my head, when I looked at the EVF and I looked at the LCD on the back of this camera, I probably wouldn't have even noticed a difference. I mean, it's very good. I'll go as far as to say as the a7R II that I previously used, the screen, both the screen and the EVF, they look really good. The build quality of the camera, I will say compared to a7R II, it feels, it by no means flimsy, don't get me wrong, but it has a lighter feel. Now, I have not had the a7R3 in my hands, but I'd be interested to see if the a7R3, if the build quality of the body of it was more on point with, more on par rather, with a7R2. This is an exceptionally well-made camera, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying it's a subtle difference. Again, a subtle difference being the absence of a button right here, and the the EVF that's not as high quality as the a7R3. So, if you really want to nitpick, you can nitpick. And Creative Dog Media, how is the size compared to a Nikon D750? I would assume this is probably a lot smaller, but I don't have a D750 to compare it to. I do have a rather large lens on this. This is the Zeiss Batis 85mm. I've been doing some photos of Sean Coonery, the big Maine Coon cat. You can check out my Instagram page, instagram.com/IrixGuy, and you can take a look at those. I've done some with the 85mm Batis that I have on right now, and then also the 25mm Batis. So one of the good things about this camera, obviously, by it being a Sony full-frame E-mount camera, is that the lenses that I had for the a7R2, obviously I'm using the same lenses. So it was easy to, a lot of people would say, well, it's actually a downgrade, but the funny thing about it is, with given the specs of this camera, what makes it an upgrade for a video person is the ability to have more autofocus points. So, ultimately for video, manual is going to be, is almost always going to be the best thing to use. But if you don't have a film crew, or in certain situations, autofocus may be better than trying to manually focus and nail focus of whatever subject or environment's being filmed. So it's nice to have quality autofocus, and the autofocus on this is actually better than the a7R3, and then obviously also better than the a7R2. So you're getting some really wicked good autofocus out of this. And I haven't, at the time of hosting this live show, right now it's about 8:25 p.m. New York City time. At the time of hosting this live show, I haven't taken this out in the field and really put it through its paces, but that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to share all the videos because I think it's important to be able to see the results. I mean, specs on paper are one thing, but having had several years of hands-on experience with my a7R2, it's going to be interesting to see what type of quality I can achieve from this. I'm expecting to get better video quality. And the stills, although they're not 42 megapixel, I think they're around 24. That's something that it concerns a lot of people. But when you think about megapixels, if you just think of just imagine a physical piece of paper, and you got a higher megapixel camera, you got, let's look at it for visualization purposes. Let's think about billboards. So you're driving down the road, you see a huge billboard, and then you drive past it, you see another big billboard, but it's not quite as big. You can tell it's noticeably smaller. Think of that when you think of megapixels. So if you take an image that was shot with a 42 megapixel camera like the a7R3 or the a7R2, and then there was a small object within that photo, let's say a boat or something that was in the water, you could zoom in on that in post-production, and you could probably see better detail because it was captured with 42 megapixel instead of 24. But at least for me, I would say 80% of the photos that I'm taking, I'm going to have everything properly staged, and this with 24 megapixels is still even overkill for that. So very rarely, given what I do, am I going to go around and snap a landscape photo and need to zoom in something within post-production. Although that is useful, but it can provide, it does bring negative aspects to the table, and those are the what am I trying to say? The file storage. I mean, when you're dealing with 42 megapixel images from an a7R3 or an a7R2, that's going to consume a lot more disk space or cloud storage, wherever you're storing your photos. Whereas this, using 24 megapixels, you're not going to consume your storage space as quickly. So that's an advantage to it. One thing I really like about the a7 III already is, and I haven't even talked about the touchscreen. I don't really care about the touchscreen, but one thing that's really cool, you can add customized menus. So you can go to add a menu at the end. So I added a menu that's, the options are format, to erase my micro SD or full-size SD card, and then I've got another option to switch between full frame and APS-C modes, and then I've got another option for manual focus toggle. So if I want to go into manual focus mode, I can simply go to that menu, or I've also assigned the button, the C4 button, the trash can button on the back, to be a toggle between manual focus and autofocus. Because at least these lenses, these Zeiss Batis lenses that I use, they don't have a physical, like a lot of the Sony G lenses, they have the physical manual to autofocus toggle switch. These do not. So it's all done through software. And again, there's a lot of situations where manual focus is still beneficial. So the new menu system's really cool. What I also like, and this is something a lot of people haven't thought about with the a7 III, is it's still got the micro USB port. You're probably familiar with that, the one that the a7R2 and a lot of the other Sony Alpha cameras have. But above it, it's got the brand new USB-C. Now, although that's a better port in my opinion, because the cable can go in either direction, there's one less point of failure there, but it's also faster. And I've already noticed when I download 4K video that I filmed with the a7 III and I use that USB-C port, it's so much faster. So that's an advantage. Up here you've got an HDMI, the little bitty HDMI, and then a headphone jack, so if you want to listen to what you're recording. And this is where it gets really cool. On this side over here, you've got a door that opens up, and inside of there, you've got 2 SD card slots. So that's something that was not present on the previous generation of Sony Alpha. And that's super important because what I do, I don't have anything that's super mission critical, so I just put 2 cards in there. So if one SD card fills up, it'll start recording to the second one. So that's how I use it. But you can also do it in a backup type mode where it'll create a copy of everything from card A to card B. So if one of your cards failed, let's say you've been shooting video and or photos all day, one of your cards fails, you should have a second card that'll hopefully work. I mean, unless something catastrophic happened to the camera and it caused both of the SD cards to fail. So Charlotte, I see Charlotte Rogers says, get Sean Coonery on the stream. Sean Coonery may be visiting the studio here shortly. He's very busy. I'll have to check to see what he is working on, because he is a very busy cat. But I'll try to get him on here in a minute. And Scott says, hi there. Is the LCD good quality outdoors, bright light, and what's the maximum SD capacity? Great questions. Welcome aboard, SoCal Seth. Scott, that's something I'm going to test. Hoping to test it within the next few days, see how well it works or how poorly it performs in bright light outside. That'll be a great test for the LCD, and then also the EVF on the back. Because ultimately, when you're using a camera like this, you want to make sure that whatever you're filming is in the frame. And if it's, I'm hoping there's two things I have on my wish list. Number one, I want to make sure that it's good enough quality so I can see what I'm filming. But ultimately, what I want to do is have something that's good enough quality so that when I'm using manual focus, like I did with my a7R2, I can see the focus peaking when I'm in manual focus mode. If it'll accomplish that, I'll be more than happy. Because I can already tell you, And the videos I posted so far were just videos from inside. So, you know, the real test will be when I take it out in the in the outdoor environment and see how it performs there. But the video I've captured so far, I can already tell that the autofocus is absolutely exceptional. And something I want to do outside is walk around in the field and just, you know, run, you know, go close to the camera, far away, use a very shallow depth of field. I'm going to use on the 25 millimeter. I've got an f2 aperture, and see how well or how poorly the autofocus performs at a very shallow depth of field like f2, and then bump it up to say an f5.6 or so, and I'm expecting to get a very rock solid autofocus experience. If I don't, I'm not going to be happy with the downgrade, because again, this is a downgrade from the a7R2. From a cost perspective, it's a downgrade, but from a feature set perspective, again, having the menu, having the customizable menu option, having the more autofocus points, having greatly superior battery life. That's something that's super important that this camera brings to the table, is a super extended battery life. So I've got to put that to the test, see how well it holds up in the day in the field. Right now I've just got one extra battery for it, but that should greatly trump the 9 or so batteries that I had for the a7R2. And then SoCal has also the DJI Ronin S. Yeah, the Ronin S, I'm super stoked because when that releases, that's definitely something that this paired with the Ronin S. If you're not familiar with the Ronin S is not yet available, but as soon as it is, I'll have it featured on my website, IrixGuy.com. And but it's a one-handed gimbal, and it'll work with it's supposed to work with a lot of cameras. What it works with that's of interest to me are the Sony Alpha cameras. So, you know, I'm super stoked about the Ronin S, and I didn't really have an interest in the previous Ronins because, number one, they were super expensive, and number two, they were super inconvenient. Even the smaller Ronins that came out, they were still too big and too heavy. And I understand that a lot of people may be using those in environments where they don't care about the travel size and the travel weight. But ultimately, I would like to have something that I could put in the bag along with other gear and still get gimbal stabilized video for something like this. And that'll be that's going to be a fun thing to play with, the Ronin S. So as soon as it comes out, you know, mark my word, I'm going to be all over that. So yeah, the Ronin S ought to be that paired with the a7 III is going to be absolutely outstanding. So yeah, SoCal says those two-handed ones were ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure they worked well. I never got my hands on one, but again, convenience, and I mean, there's, you know, holding something one-handed is fine, but having to have those two-handers and all that, I mean, it's too much stuff in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things so far, and again, I'm going to exhaustively test the a7 III. But I mean, already the battery life. To answer your question earlier about the maximum SD card size, I need to look that up because I can tell you I'm just using two 128 gig cards. You can find those cards. I've got it all linked within this video's description. If you just go to the link that says IrixGuy's store, you'll be able to find the camera link. You'll be able to find the a7 III, the cards, the batteries, and a whole lot more. So, but yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to look up the specs and see how much it can handle. I mean, I've stuck with 128 because 128 for me, even for 4K video, has always been enough. And obviously, I keep a few extra 128 cards just in case. There is a hard 4K limit. It's 29 minutes. And that's because, and I don't know how Panasonic gets around it with their Lumix cameras, but for most cameras, it's something, and I don't understand all the reasoning behind it, but if something's classified as a camera versus a camcorder, that they have to put that 29-minute hard stop. So if I'm filming with this, I can film up to 29 minutes, but right before 29 minutes, I would have to stop it and then restart the recording. Which, maybe that's a deal breaker, but, think about the times that you filmed and how many times do you really film beyond 29 minutes continuously. I mean, even when I'm doing field tests of drones, there's been few times where I've gotten close to that 29-minute mark. So, for me, it's not a huge concern. Rod Piker says, "Hi there, everyone from Northern Ireland, United Kingdom. Great discussion." Hey, man, welcome aboard. So we've got the entire world here. This is cool. But yeah, this camera, and again, with any new piece of technology, I'm very cautious about making claims or recommending something until I've really had an exhaustive amount of time with it. And yeah, the RX100 is a weird exception. If the RX100 could do 29 minutes, it would be great. And then that's why, if you're looking at RX100, if you want to get rid of that 5-minute limitation, then you're stepping up to an RX10, which negates the small travel size and small travel weight of the RX100, but it gives you up to 29 minutes of recording. So it'd be really cool with the RX100 Mark VI if they could somehow increase that 4K recording capability up to 29 minutes. And I don't know if that's a thermal, if that's related to temperature, or why they gimp that camera to 5 minutes, because 5 minutes is kind of short. Any ideas about average pricing? I'm not sure, man. With the Ronin S, I don't know. My assumption is that it may come in below the other Ronins. I mean, I don't know. But then if they try to sell the convenience aspect of it, then they could potentially be at or above the price of the other Ronins. I don't know. I haven't seen any. I have not heard any solid speculation as to what it may be priced at. But yeah, it's funny. This YouTube Live interface constantly changes. It actually looks really good. Yeah, SoCal says only so much you can fit in a tiny housing is my guess. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting for sure. But yeah, this a7iii, I mean, it's got me super excited. And what's funny is, so many people are like, man, everybody's excited about this base camera, and this, in my opinion, is definitely not a base model camera, but it's funny the features that they gave this, they didn't even give the a7iii. The number of autofocus points. I mean, that's huge. Being able to have that many autofocus points for video in 4K is awesome. Now, we don't get 4K 60, and there's a lot of speculation surrounding the a7S III that was not announced at NAB the last week, or actually this week, that they think the a7S III may bring 4K 60 to the table, and that does it feel nice in the hand? Honestly, man, it feels like my a7R II. I will tell you, and this has been really nitpicky, but like I'd mentioned earlier, this knob right here doesn't have the button in the middle to prevent it from turning on its own. But I mean, that thing takes a lot of force to turn, so I'm not concerned about that. That's a subtle difference between this a7R II and a7R III. But the ergonomics of it are really nice. One thing they did that is a small but huge improvement is they've moved the video start recording button here. And the a7R II is over here. It was just a weird place for a stop and start recording. But yeah, ergonomically it feels great. The grip and those pieces, they feel just as good as the a7R II. This is, I don't think this is, they mentioned weatherproofing, but I don't think, I wouldn't trust this thing, and I didn't trust my a7R2 either. You know, if it was raining, I put it in a dry bag. But as far as an underwater housing like they have for the RX100 that would work with this, I haven't researched that yet. Something I failed to mention earlier, it does have a touch screen, and it has a joystick. This joystick right here is really cool. If you're snapping photos and you want to use a spot focus type deal, you know, pick your focus point, this right here is really neat. And that's something I want to explore when I take it outdoors and really put the a7iii through its paces for the first time, because there's a lot of subtle but radically new features to this. One thing I did, and this was, you know, this LCD on the back, just like the previous model Sony Alphas, it won't go forward. I wish they would come up with a way to allow you to slide this to the side, so that if you're doing a face on video segment type deal, that you could see yourself face on video. But since you can't flip it forward, the mobile app that was built in, I used it in the a7R2 to pair a smartphone with it, and then use the Play Memories app on my iPhone to act as a field monitor of sorts, so I could confirm if I'm in the camera's frame, and then start recording. That was handy, and that is still present on here. Although it seems that they've done away with the apps, because the a7R2 allowed people to install apps. It looks like they may have done away with that with the a7iii, but they did keep the functionality to pair the Play Memories app to the camera to function as a viewfinder of sorts. So I'm glad that was still in there. That was something I was kind of worried about, because without that, if you're doing face on video and you don't have your film crew, you were tasked with you've got a couple of options. You can say, okay, this is where this should be shooting, and you could go and you could stand by a stationary object and start recording as a test, and then keep recording test until you know exactly where to stand to ensure that you're in the optimal part of the camera's field of view. That's one way to do it. But it's better, you know, if you've got a little viewfinder where you can look and say, okay, I'm lined up how I want to be within this shot, and not have to deal with all the hoopla. So again, optimally, Sony would come out with something like they have on their little RX100 pocket camera, point and shoot camera, that would enable this screen to go up and be able to be, even if it's just partially visible from the front of the camera, it would be better than not being visible at all. So that's a small gripe, but a gripe that's present again throughout the current Sony Alpha camera lineup. So, you know, nothing to get too upset about. There are tons of buttons. They're customizable. You got C1, you've got C4 down here, which is a little trash can. You've got C2, C1. It's easy to customize this. Yeah, flip to the side. I wish they would just do that. I mean, that's one thing that Panasonic does really well with their Lumix cameras, like the GH4 and the GH5, is that they let you, they let that little LCD on the back pop out and face forward, so you can see what you're you can see where you are if you're filming yourself. I mean, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. So I don't know if they've got a reason for this. Another thing would be, if it would flip out, it would be nice if it would flip over, so that when you put this in your pack, I mean, the first thing I did with this out of the box, if you've watched my a7iii unboxing video, first thing I did is apply this glass screen protector. Because, see, this doesn't flip around. I mean, when this camera's not in use, that LCD screen on the back is exposed. And that's the first thing I did, is put that glass screen protector on to better protect it. Yeah, Ron says he loves his GH5, his Panasonic Lumix GH5. Those are always... I'll use the GH4 and I got some really cool 4K video with it and some good photos as well. And the only reason I switched from Panasonic to Sony is that there's something I can do with Sony that, and now it's not as important because I learned a lot more about, you know, using video and manual mode, etc. So if I went back to a GH4 or GH5, I would be better capable of using it. But what the Sony let me do is kind of cheat with settings. So I mean, I can, for example, I can kick this in when I go into the video mode, and then I set it to aperture priority. If I want to film somebody, and like I'm using this Batis f1.8, I can kick the aperture to 1.8, and then the camera will control all the other settings. So I don't have to be an expert with all the other settings. I can just say, okay, I want the shallow depth of field. I'm going to set the aperture to f1.8, and then let the camera do everything else. So Sony's have enabled me to cheat to some degree. Yeah, that 4K 60 on the GH5 is sweet. You know, one thing, it's kind of crazy because, you know, being a micro 4/3 camera, they do have a lot of lens options, and that's been a gripe with the Sony Alphas, especially with the full frame lenses. Now we're seeing a lot more, and we're seeing a lot of other players become involved, like Tokina and Sigma, and you know, we're going to have a lot more options out there. But as far as the Sony branded and the Zeiss branded lenses, you know, you're still somewhat limited to what you can get in FE, Sony full frame lens format, and that's, you know, an advantage that the Lumix, you know, being micro 4/3, you've got a lot of options out there. And those lenses, those Leica lenses, are super duper nice, man. But yeah, that's the thing with cameras. There's always something that one model has that the other doesn't. Or I mean, just like with this, with the, you know, the a7 III and then the a7 R3. You know, the R3, that's more megapixels, but with it you take a sacrifice, because with it the autofocus isn't as good as the a7 III. So it's yeah, SoCal says it's hard out there for a pimp, man. Vlogging ain't easy, and that, I mean, that's for sure. You know, you gotta be on. You've got to be in the know with the current tech at all times. And that doesn't mean all the tech, but just at least the tech that you're interested in. And I tell you, I'm excited. I mean, anytime a new camera body comes out that's of interest, it's always a treat to take it out and see, you know, what it can and can't do. And the cool thing is, by coming from a7R2, I'm using the same glass. So I've got a Batis 85mm, Batis 25mm, and a Loxia 50mm. So by using the same lenses, I'll have that baseline, and the only variable obviously will be the camera body. So, and I can tell you already with Sean Coonery, the big Maine Coon cat, and you can find that on my Instagram page, Instagram.com/IrixGuy. I've snapped a lot of stills of Sean Coonery already with the a7 III, and I mean, that autofocus, man, it is spot on. I mean, it really is. And that was, you know, the a7R2 was something that was a little bit sluggish. I mean, our a7R2, awesome camera, don't get me wrong, but the autofocus was at times problematic. So I think this may be a huge leap forward. You know, even though we're not getting 4K 60 video, we're still getting 4K 30. I think this should be a huge leap forward just from the autofocus perspective. I mean, if you look at this camera, let's say that you're a stills photographer or you're a 4K video person. You know, with this, you're getting battery life that is greatly superior to the previous generation. You know, to the a7R2, this blows it out of the water. And then, yeah, Rod Piger says you will never keep up with tech. You really can't. But yeah, just the battery life and the autofocus points alone make this camera a steal of a deal, in my opinion. And again, it's one of those things I got to take it out in the field and really thoroughly test and see how I can become disappointed with this camera. I mean, that's my objective, is to go out and try to find something that upsets me. And that's, if you have any ideas, shoot me a message on social media, because I've got a laundry list of tests. And those initial tests are, obviously battery life, shooting with a fully charged battery, seeing how many minutes of video I'm able to capture, and then with the video, do the autofocus test, walk around with a shallow depth of field, and see how well or how poorly the autofocus works. That was the thing with a7R2. You kicked it into autofocus, and if you were shooting wide open with what's my 25mm lens, I'm out doing a field test drone video, shooting wide open with an f2, that would it would create a lot of focus breathing. Now, if I bumped it up to f5.6 or so, it was somewhat okay, but you could still see the focus breathing, and that's something that really irritates me with autofocus, is seeing that. It just takes away the otherwise nailed video quality that the Sony Alphas can produce. SoCal says don't recommend the drop test. Definitely not going to try to do the drop test, because that would be horrible. I did put this aftermarket neck strap on, and I've already found a mild complaint about this aftermarket neck strap, and that's right there. There's a ridge and a ridge. So if you've got this beside a table and you lift it up, there's a possibility that ridge, see this right here, that it can kind of get hung and make you jerk. So yeah, Ian says thoughts on the announced Blackmagic Pocket camera, and this is the Blackmagic camera that was announced at CES or NAB show this week, and it looks really super duper cool. Now, a lot of people looking at the physical design of the camera, they're criticizing it, which that doesn't bother me. I care about the quality, but it'll do 4K 60, and it'll use the micro four thirds lenses. The only negatives that I've heard so far, beyond the physical design of the camera, is that people question, which lenses will actually be autofocus capable with that. Not that you would necessarily have to use autofocus. I mean, for that type camera, it may be optimal for doing interviews, that sort of stuff, but in manual focus. But yeah, Sean made a good point. He says doubtful that Blackmagic will have the same low light capabilities. That's another thing. Low light, this a7iii, this thing trumps the previous generation a7S2, and that was kind of the low light boss, and this is better than that, which is crazy. It makes you wonder what the a7S3 that's not yet released, which capabilities it may bring to the table rather. Ian says also wonder how it would fit on a gimbal. The screen looks amazing. Yeah, the screen on the back of that Blackmagic, the newly announced Blackmagic Pocket camera, looks really good. And the price point of that, I mean, they're coming in, again, all that stuff can change, but it looks like just a little bit over $1,000 US, which is pretty crazy when you think about that. But yeah, the screen on the back, it could quite possibly be one of the best integrated screens. And I know a lot of people use those Atomos screens, and they've had Atomos recorders rather, and they've had a lot of good things to say about that. My only question with that would be, is it an inconvenience to have to carry around an external recorder with you? But it also doubles as a screen, which that's kind of cool. But yeah, with that Blackmagic, that screen on the back, it's worth mentioning the screen on the back of the Blackmagic Pocket camera that's coming out. It's not articulating. It seems like it's fixed. So, not that would be a problem. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of 4K video is without a doubt now the new standard, and we're probably going to see a lot more tools come to the table that will enable us to capture better quality 4K video. So it's very interesting stuff. Let's see, I lost my tab. There we go. Well, yeah, I just wanted to touch base with everyone. Stay tuned. Obviously, I will be all over the a7iii, and I'm going to be performing an exhaustive amount of field tests. So if there's anything in particular that you would like to see me try to test in the field with the a7iii, let me know, and I'll try to add that to my shoot list, because I'm looking for ideas, and I really want to see how well or how poorly this performs. But I mean, its initial impressions have exceeded my expectations, and you know, just check out those few photos that I posted to Sean Coonery already, and just look at the detail. And you know, that alone, that was one of my biggest fears. You know, coming from a7R2 was you know, jumping from 42 megapixels down to 24 is not going to be an issue. It's definitely not for me. Sean says, my only concern with my incoming a7iii is the blinking pixel glitch. I don't know how common. What is the blinking pixel glitch, man? Is it visible on the screen only, or is it visible within a still photo or a video? As if it's out there, man, that's something I want to try to produce if I can. Blinking pixel bottom left hand screen when shooting 4K. Interesting. So does it appear within the video that's been recorded, or only within the viewfinder on the back, or the EVF? I'll have to Google that, man. Well, actually, I may not, because if I see that, then I'm going to be looking at every video that I post, and I'm going to be staring at it to see if I see a blinking pixel. Well, now you got me wondering about the Sean Coonery video that I filmed, the first video that I filmed with this a7iii, to see if it's got a blinking pixel in it. Well, if you didn't see it in there, that's a good thing, because I'm not going to look for it. I drive myself crazy. Definitely drive myself crazy. So, yeah, and I will say, and this is, it just says 4K steady shot inside, but having used the a7R2 for several years, which also has an IBIS in-body image stabilization, my perception of this is that the IBIS is better. And I did I did 4K video test with the 85mm. I haven't posted that video yet, which this Batis 85 has image stabilization built into the lens. But the Batis 25 that I posted the Sean Coonery video with, where he was sitting on this table, that lens does not have stabilization. So that video, everything you saw was the product of the in-body, the camera body stabilization. So it looked really good, and I think it looks better than the a7R2 stabilization. And where I notice that if I'm moving the camera like this, it's more easy for me to hold a seemingly straight and steady line, versus the a7R2. It had more of a little jumping around to it, but it's a good thing. And I mean, obviously you've got your what do you call it, your multi-shoe. One of my favorite mics when I'm not using my Rode is just a little Sony multi-shoe interface mic that I put on here, and it does a really good job. Surprisingly worth mentioning is the integrated microphone in this. To be built into the camera, it sounds really good, and I was beyond impressed with the mic's performance. Yeah, Rod Piker says water and sunlight is a good test. Well, where I'm planning to film, there ought to be water, and hopefully there'll be sunlight. So I'm going to try to get as many shots as I can. I'll try to get water. I'll try to get shooting somewhat directly into the sun with video. I get a collection of still photos and you know, and obviously 4K video as well. So it's gonna be interesting to see how it holds up, and you know how it stacks up in comparison to the a7R2, because I really enjoyed the a7R2, but not having perfect autofocus on the a7R2 for me and at times was a huge negative. So be interesting to see how all this comes together. But I'm going to go ahead and conclude this live show. You'll be able to find the previously recorded version. Just go to my website, IrixGuy.com, and you'll be able to find this previously recorded live show as well as all my other live shows. And you can find all the cameras and accessories that I've talked about. Just go to my website, go to store. You can go to camera store if you're looking for cameras. Go to drone store if you're looking for drones. I've got it all there. So thanks for tuning in. Great audience, great questions. And hopefully within the next day or so, I'll have a follow-up live show after I've had the chance to post some 4K video test, and we can kind of get together and chat about observations. I mean, just like your blinking pixel thing. I mean, I haven't. I've researched the a7 III quite heavily before I picked it up, but it was something I didn't run into. But I guess that's because I wasn't necessarily looking for the cons to the a7 III, so I wasn't really targeting that. But anyway, yeah, thank y'all for tuning in. I got to run too, and we'll get together in a few days. Y'all have a good one. Hey y'all, IrixGuy here. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe, like, and share. It's viewers like you that enable my channel to continue to grow. Thank you.